Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining InfiniteMD's ongoing COVID sessions to provide up-to-date information regarding the ongoing pandemic. Today, we are joined by Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding, who is an epidemiologist and health economist at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health, senior fellow at the Federation of American Scientists in Washington, D.C., and an advisor to the World Health Organization, the WHO. And he's also one of the most influential coronavirus health professionals today in the United States. Also joining us is the co-founder and CEO of InfiniteMD, Dr. Babak Movassaki.
Thank you, Eric, for joining us today. We know how busy you are. My mom sees you all the time now on TV, BBC and other channels. And also I want to congratulate you on your recent piece in the New Yorker. Each week there are more and more updates and news articles. We want to know today, what are the most important updates that we should be aware of? So the purpose of this is answering ongoing questions from individuals and employees that we receive on a daily basis, actually worldwide. So thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having here. And this epidemic has just grown in such scales in the last 2 months. It's really quite unbelievable. Every day feels like a week, and every week feels like a year or a decade. So I'll try to sum up a few highlights, especially what's going on in the US and why we need to be really, really vigilant about this epidemic. So I'll go into a few slides just briefly, and then we can discuss individual points of where we should go potentially. So, this is a quick little mini update on SARS-CoV, which is the virus that causes COVID-19. And I want people to first realize we have our own choose our own adventure. Our choose our own adventure is, what do we want in the next few months in the United States? Do we want a contained epidemic or a completely uncontained epidemic? And that was entirely dependent on the choices that we make in terms of our mitigation. And this graph is from the CDC of hospitalization by age group. This epidemic spares no one. Even if mortality is much lower among the young, the number of hospitalizations is still quite enormously high. The hospitalizations are the light blue, the ICUs are the medium blue. And you can see young people are just not spared of hospitalizations either. And more importantly, young people can spread it even if they have a mild to moderate case, which is 80%. And how quickly is it growing? Well, it depends on where it is in the United States. I have more details. Just so you know, last month, the doubling time for this epidemic was estimated to be 6.5 days. 100 becomes 200, becomes 400, becomes 800, and so on. Since then, that has been cut in over half. The US doubling time for deaths is now 2.7 days. Florida is around 3.8, but they're catching up. But New York, it is 2 days. The number of deaths double every 2 days. And that is just an enormous number. And I hope to God that this exponential function does not continue. And among other metro areas, besides New York, if you take New York out of the map, which metro areas are the worst? Well, it's DC, Maryland, Northern Virginia, Los Angeles, Chicago, followed by Detroit, Miami, New Orleans, Philadelphia, Boston, and many other metro areas are all on the rise. So this epidemic is not slowing down. It is definitely increasing, not just in New York as well. There's many strategies to get out of it, but right now, until we can slow it down, we have to use the containment and lockdown strategies for mitigation.
Thank you, Eric. To continue on that, basically, the way that you're describing it, it is still here to stay for a while. And as you know, the U.S. government just extended the social distancing measures to end of April 30th. What are your thoughts on that? Is that a good date, or do you see this to be additionally extended in the future? What are your thoughts on it?
April 30th, I hate to say it, we will not have it contained yet. we may have slowed it down. Right now, all those graphs I showed you are, by the way, log scale graphs, which means any line you see is actually an exponential function. So I think we will potentially improve this in terms of making it sub-exponential to just a linear increase. That would be an enormous improvement if we just nudge it to be sub-exponential. And that's what's happening in Italy. But it took a long time for it to bend downwards to be sub-exponential.
Thank you.
Of course. Of course, the U.S. is, as you mentioned, kind of early on in this journey. Have there been any perhaps positive implications from some of the quarantine measures that we've implemented? In other words, how do you think the U.S. as a whole is doing in terms of flattening the curve with everything that's already happened so far?
I think overall, long term, we need to think about how do we obviously balance a lot of the economic activities with this, with this, because we can't obviously shut down forever. This virus will be with us for the remainder of 2020 for sure, and the vaccine won't arrive until 12 to 18 months. So if we're lucky, 12 months, maybe 10 or 11 if they stop the DSMB trial and find an amazing result.
Yeah, on the topic of testing, then, there's just so many headlines that have been coming out with regards to all types of sort of new testing kits. You just mentioned this 5-minute rapid test coming out from Abbott, and from your slides a little bit earlier, you've discussed that testing is currently we're under testing, but given all these new things that are coming out and some of these new innovations, as of today, can you give a brief update on the status of testing in the U.S. in terms of, in between all these different headlines?
Abbott has a new test, a 5-minute point of care test, which will be amazing. Like LabCorp and Quest can do huge volumes of tests per day. But the question is, you have to get the swab. You need a super long needle, and it can't be a wooden needle. So it has to be a certain special swab stick. And those were in short supply, and as well as the reagents. So assuming we get through all these reagents, kits, and all these logistics, what we need to do is to do a mass testing in a way in which there's two kinds of testing. One is nucleic acid testing of a PCR test of the current virus. The second kind of testing is serology testing of your blood's antibodies. Antibodies are your body's defenses, and antibodies specific to the virus. So in Germany, for example, they've already started planning to issue immunity certificates. Basically, if your blood shows that you have this virus-specific antibody, you will be given a certificate of clearance that you have some degree of immunity from this virus.
Basically, you're saying also, for example, if I may interrupt, is that for, let's say, employees or even healthcare workers that have been asymptomatic, didn't even know they had the virus, but you need them to be tested, ideally, with this fast.
Yeah, exactly. And the other key thing is that with this other testing, with fast testing, what you can do is you can have a rotating system where half of your employees work, say, cohort A works week 1. On a Friday afternoon, they're all tested. And then there's a cohort B who work the second week. Friday afternoon, they're retested. And then the cohort A who were tested the first week and are clean can come back for week 3. And basically you can rotate, they can shuffle their schedule to be cohort A, cohort B, retested each week. That kind of system actually could work. It's been discussed. I've been kind of pushing it. So altogether, there are ways to, if we ramp up testing to a very high degree, instantaneous on-site clinical testing, as well as serology testing to give those who have long-term immunity, I think that there are ways in which we can go back to work.
Coming back to the vaccine, so based on clinicaltrials.gov, there are over 250 clinical trials ongoing right now. And leading pharmaceutical company announced this week that they have basically a lead vaccine candidate. What is the outlook in that? I know you already talked about a little bit about the time frame, but what is outlook in that, and is there some good news there?
Well, I think that all the trials right now are in phase 1. So just so you know, there's phase 1 for safety and to test if it induces an immune response and that it doesn't enhance the virus, because there are some vaccines that actually help enhance the virus once you put it into clinical testing. So we've already cut one corner, and the corner that we've cut is animal testing. Normally, you're supposed to do animal testing, then phase 1 human testing. We've already cut that corner out. So we need a vaccine that not just works, but works in 90% of the time or more. Maybe 80 we could get away with it.
If you look in China, they are going out right now. Our colleagues were having sushi 2 nights ago in a restaurant. So is this something that we could be cheerful of and hopeful of?
I'm hopeful, but China still has an epidemic. They admit they still have an epidemic, and they're finally, as of yesterday, reporting the number of asymptomatic lab positive cases, which they weren't before, and they have thousands of them. And today, CDC says that up to 25% of all cases have no symptoms, and they are transmittable, contagious people.
Chris,
interestingly, on that, does this redefine what herd immunity means? Where, on one hand, you mentioned that this is very infectious, and we have the hypothesis is that a large number of people will get this. At the same time, you also discussed that in order for a vaccine to be effective, it has to have over 90% coverage in terms of effectiveness. So perhaps maybe you could explain traditional, herd immunity, but maybe how this pandemic actually redefines the definition of that, given how fast it sort of took a foothold in the world.
For herd immunity to kick in, 60% at minimum, but optimally 70-80% of the people need to be immune before I get appreciable protection from you on the other side of the room from the people who are immune. So if only half the people in the room have immunity, that's not good enough to protect you from me from you. So that at the same time, I don't think we should talk about it until we have a vaccine, because it is extremely dangerous and extremely unlikely that 70-80% of the people will have immunity before the vaccine comes out.
Very, very, very insightful, Eric. And before we move to a close, though, do you have anything? Do you have any words of wisdom that perhaps is more in tune in terms of a perspective of optimism? Do you have any? A lot of this, of course, seems very overwhelming. But do you have? What are the rays of hope that we, both as individuals and as a humanity, can look forward to?
I think the rays of hope are that good and fast testing will be on the horizon. That is what I'm really hopeful. I think we will mobilize our technological resources to do more contact tracing. I think businesses are ready, they've woken up and ready to adapt to different ways to work. I think serology testing to give you a sense of if you've been exposed and have currently developed immunity will allow a lot of people to lay their fears. And so I think there are a lot of things, even before the vaccine, that will be good. And there are some drugs on the market. Now, whether or not they're affordable and don't have shortages is to be seen. But I think drugs are potentially on the market later this summer once they finish their accelerated trials. So I think by the end of this summer, we will have figured out a strategy how to sustain our economy for this fall until the vaccine arrives. So I think people should just be patient, and we will get through this, and we will be stronger as a global health system in the long run once we come out on the other side.
Very good. Babak, is there anything else you want to add?
I just want to thank you, Eric, for joining us again. So we look forward to getting more updates in the near future as things are evolving quite rapidly. Some encouraging words at the end, so I'll take that with me for now. And I want to again thank you also, Chris, for hosting this.
Yeah, thanks for hosting, guys, and look forward to future updates.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. Thank you both.